So let's
Yes.
just start. So thank you for spending time with Greg and I today. We really appreciate all the information and knowledge you've shared with us. Professor Alan Pearce, if you'd just like to spend, I
My pleasure. I'm glad to
love
be
how
on.
you're incredibly humble too, mate.
Yeah, they're just titles. They don't mean anything really. So I'm happy just to be called Al. That's fine.
Okay, thank you. If you just spend 5 minutes
Yeah,
chatting about yourself and how you've ended up
sure.
pursuing the truth and concussion and seizures.
Yeah, look, I've been a neuroscientist probably for about I'm just trying to think now, nearly 30 years. So I'm an old salty sea dog. Um, and originally, so I was born and I grew up in Perth, and I did all my education there, and I've sort of fell into neuroscience going through my undergraduate degree because it wasn't something that was really, out there at the time in the sort of late 1980s, early 1990s. Um, when you're at school and you're asking the school counselor what you want to do, neuroscience it wasn't exactly, high on the agenda. Um, so I kind of, worked my way through to this area and long story short is that I was fortunate enough to be offered a PhD scholarship at the University of West Australia in the Department of Medicine. And that's kind of where things first started because I started to learn a technique where I could look at the brain and understand the physiology of the brain. And one of the postdoc fellows, so someone who's finished their PhD, they're doing their sort of first job after PhD school. She was trying to look at how the brain recovered after a stroke, which is another form of brain injury, and using this technique, and it really sort of intrigued me how the brain was able to re sort of repair and reorganize, and basically it was the one of the first sort of steps into now what we understand as neuroplasticity. Now, so that really got me interested in brain injury, and so I sort of, went through my PhD, got my PhD, moved across to Melbourne because Melbourne's a bit bigger than Perth. Um, and it took a while, but it sort of, I wanted to go down the brain injury pathway again, trying to understand originally how the brain recovered after a car accident or a fall or something more serious. But, it was very difficult to try and get into that field. So sort of, it took a while, took almost probably 8 or 9 years before I was able to sort of start to get the foot in the door. And, I started to get a project up with one of the hospitals here in Melbourne, where they were looking at trying to understand how, people recovered after stroke in particular, but also car accidents. And I was, going to use my technique of trying to understand that. But unfortunately, the study didn't really go all that well. The rehab physician is a very nice guy, but just has no understanding about scientific design and scientific research. So, the study was a real dog's breakfast, and it just didn't go anywhere. We couldn't really analyze the data properly. So I went to another university around 2010-ish,
Was
and there
that
was a
9 years of work, Doc? Sorry.
Oh yeah, look, just general academic, teaching, lecturing, anatomy, physiology. I did a stint at Tennis Australia for a couple of years, heading up their, sports science because my dad has a background in tennis, so I was able to get a job there. So, I kind of, I was sort of meandering along for quite some time trying to find my place. And then, sort of things started to come together around 2009. But, as I said, it didn't quite get there. And so I moved to another uni in 2000 and sort of 10-ish, 11-ish, and there was a football player in the lab that I was sort of setting up and building up, and he played VFL football, which is the one level below. And he sort of, kind of said, "Oh, have you thought about concussion?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, absolutely. We've been hearing some, reports from America, early reports from America about this strange disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, but, it seemed to be an American disease. We don't know much about it." And I went, okay. I think this is something that we need to look at, and so I started to go down that pathway and at that point we didn't understand the differences between, say, concussion injury and CTE. So it was all kind of lumped together. And so I got to, through this student who was a football player, got to meet some player managers who said, yeah, look, we've managed players for a number of years, and we're noticing a problem. We're noticing that some of the old fellas, their marriages are falling apart, they're depressed, they've got impairments, they losing their memory, they're only in their late 40s. There's something not right. Could we look at them? And I said, well, I think we might. And so I had a meeting in particular with one player manager, and it was kind of interesting because he's a real character, and halfway through lunch he kind of went, let me look and see what you do. He kind of wasn't interested in talking. He just wanted to look and see what I did. And so I said, yeah, all right. So we cut lunch early, and I went down, took him down to the lab. And I sort of said, look, this is my equipment. This is what I do. And he goes, oh, well, hook me up. And I'm like, well, I can't just, hook anyone up. We've got to make sure everything. No, just do it. Just do it. I don't care. And I'm like, okay, all right. As long as you take the risk, because the technique I use, which I can talk about a bit more, does have some elements of risk. And so I hooked him up, and I just, did a few, it's a brain stimulation technique. So I stimulated his brain a few times, and I read the waveforms coming through, and I said, look, this is really loose, but I'm not doing a proper scientific protocol here. I'm just having a little look around, and what you're showing, what I'm seeing is kind of what I was seeing back in the 1990s with my postdoc fellow, with people who've had a stroke. Have you had any brain injuries? Have you had
Wasn't
something?
a waste of time. It was worth it.
Yeah. And he just turned to
Oh,
me, he looked at me, and he said, you're the first person to tell me exactly what's happened to me without me giving you a single, bit of information. I've had concussions from football. I've had martial art, being knocked out multiple times in martial arts. I've had 3 car accidents. No one else has been able to tell me anything except from you. We're going ahead with it. So 2012, I started getting players that were being sent to me, and so we started to get things rolling, and as with anything, we got a few players, and then it kind of sort of pitted out a bit, and I'm sort of like, when are we going to get some more players? And there were a lot of people scared as well. Oh, I don't know if I want to be tested because I don't want to know if I have damage or impairments. I'd rather not know. Typical males that just don't want to know until something catastrophic happens. And so this player manager, he's very well connected. He decided to ring up Channel 7. And I suddenly get this call from, it's called Sunday Night at the time. I think you have a very similar program called Sunday.
yes.
And there's a lot of sharing of, yeah, a lot of sharing of stories. And for about 4 months, it was going backwards and forwards. Oh, we want to do a program. And I'm like, I don't have enough data. I can't talk about this because I don't have enough data yet. And he's like, come on, we can help you. If you put yourself out there, we might be able to get more people for you. And I'm like, oh. So eventually I relented, and we got a retired AFL player and a retired NRL player who were sort of struggling. And I tested them. I sort of showed them, look, this is what I'm seeing. It's very similar to what I've seen previously. I think we have some problems here. The show went ballistic. Like, it went absolutely ballistic. I went from being completely unknown to probably over 100 to 200 media calls that week, because two of the most prominent athletes in Australia were worried about their own brain health, neurological health. And ever since February, I think it's February 2012, uh, my life has changed completely. And all I do now is concussion. I don't do any other research. I just do concussion and CTE research. And it's as I said, yeah, it's every single day of my life now.
Incredible journey so far. Do you want to ask him some questions?
Yeah, hey, question. From where you sit right now
Yeah.
to what you started in 2012, have you seen many changes?
Look, yeah, probably only in the last 4 to 5 years though. So when I first sort of started to sort of, talk about this publicly, there was a lot of pushback and disbelief and cynicism. There was a bit of uh, what's the word I'm after? People were mocking and sort of laughing at what I did, sort of yeah, sort of saying, what does he know? He has no idea what he's talking about. What's this technique? I've never heard of this technique. So, there were seminars run by some of the big sports not long after that, this story came out, and they were ridiculing me in the seminars. I was getting text messages from colleagues who attended that seminar and said, "Oh my God, you don't want to know what they're saying about you right now." So now people are, in the last 5 years, unfortunately, it's taken the deaths of a number of high-profile athletes for the sports and, some of the people to start to change their attitudes. But yeah, it's been a long road in trying to, get people to become aware and acknowledge then, that CTE is actually a real disease.
Yeah, it would be awesome if you could just spend some time sort of informing us how you developed your monitoring system, or just explain to us what your science and research has created.
Yeah, so the technique I use, the technical term is transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS. Now, most people, when they hear that, they think of the therapeutic version, which they give to people with depression and other mental health conditions, and that is certainly a type of TMS that has developed from the original TMS, which is what I use, which is what we call single pulse. So what I'm able to do is I'm able to stimulate your brain non-invasively. So, obviously don't open up your skull or anything like that. We put a magnetic coil, a copper coil over the top, which creates a magnetic field. We can stimulate the brain artificially. We can get a response, which is like some waveforms. And that waveform response tells us of the integrity of the central nervous system when we're stimulating. And now it's been around since about 1985, and I sort of started first using it in around 1994. So still fairly new when I was, but it's very well established worldwide now. It's used in a whole bunch of different areas. So it's not just for what I use it in concussion, but also for people understanding the brain with Parkinson's disease, motor neuron disease, depression, the effects of medications. It's a really, very versatile tool to use, but I just happen to use it for brain injury. And, I've probably published specifically with retired players, probably a good 15, 20 papers now, showing that there are abnormalities based upon repetitive impacts to the brain that MRI or CT scans don't show anything.
DTI, MRI.
Let's see if that varies.
Yeah, is it different to the scans like I had, the DTI, MRI?
Yeah. So MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, CT, which is computed tomography, really just show a very basic view of the brain from a visual perspective. Now, they certainly have their value, but particularly for concussion and repetitive trauma, where what we're looking at is far more micro. These techniques are just not good enough, even though they might cost $10 million. Their resolution isn't good enough to pick up. DTI is diffusion tensor imaging, and that shows, I guess, how the brain cells work. So what you're looking at with a DTI scan is how the brain cells are moving water in and out of the the neurons or the brain cells. And so the picture you get from a DTI scan is far more like what I do with my technique, is looking at how the physiology of the brain cells. So if they're damaged, then the water is not going to move in and out. And so it shows up as little black spots, and shows that this part of the brain is not necessarily working effectively or even at all. And that may then obviously stop connections between other parts of the brain. And just like a railway system, if the railway line is broken, the train can't get through from one city to another. And so that in itself is an issue. And so it's far more detailed, but at the moment, it's considered experimental.
Yes.
So your average doctor or neurologist will go, well, yeah, look, it looks pretty convincing, but we still haven't got it in our normal clinical daily practice, so we can't accept it as readily as what we would like to. And that's been the problem. Pardon?
Is that acceptance the same with what you're doing?
Yeah, that's right. They consider my technique experimental as well. So, I don't know. Yeah, just like anything, the medical community are very hesitant. And I kind of get that, because there's been some absolute, terrible things that have happened in medicine because they've been too quick to accept something or not test it properly. But at the same time, we've got multiple publications now, scientifically peer-reviewed publications showing that, there are problems in those who've had repetitive neurotrauma, whether it be sport or military, or even domestic violence for that matter. We see that there is something going on that we can marry up with behavioral changes or
Has there
mental
been
health.
abnormalities, Doc? Can you explain some of the abnormalities that you see in patients?
Yeah, look, a lot of them, again, it's very individualized, but generally speaking, we see a lot of aggression and irritability, lack of focus and concentration. So, you might be talking to someone and they don't quite understand, or they don't pick up, because they're not attending. They're kind of getting distracted a bit. A lot of them talk about memory issues, but my research is sort of showing that the fact that they can't focus and concentrate affects their ability to retain or memorize information. So, they might go, their partner or their wife might say, oh, can you go down to the shop and get me milk, cheese, bread, some vegetables for dinner tonight or whatever? And they go, oh, yeah, no worries. And they go down, and then they go, why am I here? What am I getting? And it's
Focus, yeah.
yeah. So the first time they go, oh, maybe it's my memory, but it's the fact that just there's this inability to concentrate, and that in itself is a concern. Some have movement disorders. Some have mood changes. They're depressed, or they're highly anxious. So it's a very difficult area to tie down specifically because everyone's so different, and that's where we're hitting issues right now in terms of whether someone can be diagnosed with CTE or not, because it's not like a clear criteria like Parkinson's, where someone starts to get a tremor or they can't move. Alzheimer's, that the best we can do right now is possibly either diagnose cognitive impairments and or dementia.
How many of those things would you want as a professional? How many boxes would you want ticked before you started investigating, or a professional started investigating those things you just outlined? Like, when do we as people, as players, when do we go, okay, I've got balance issues, I've got the memory or the concentration, I've got the brain fog, the three. When does then somebody go, okay, Greg and Shane, you need to see Al? How many of those should we be looking at before we?
That's a great question. I really don't know, because
With a history of sport, or
I think any like even any one of those, and I might be being a bit overly sort of let's say I'm not conservative enough, but any one of those with a history of repetitive neurotrauma, I think should be a trigger to be assessed. Look, I'll tell you just, as an example, why I think that's important just from my own life experience. So my family has a history of cardiovascular disease. My grandfather died at 54 years of age of a heart attack. My father died at 54 years of age with a heart attack. I've just ticked over the same age. And I have no symptoms. I have no symptoms at all. I'm on the bike daily. Up until just before COVID hit, I was doing heavy weights. And I'd like to get back into weights, but I'm scared of getting the delayed muscle soreness. So I'm kind of working that out. But at the same time, I'm sort of semi-unemployed right now. So I've got to try and find money for a gym. But the bottom line is that physically there is nothing wrong with me, touch wood. I have no symptoms. I know that I have a family history. So I thought, well, I'm going to enter into a study where they were doing what they called a calcium screen for heart disease. I kind of went in, I cleared the entry criteria. I had a little bit of high blood pressure, but that wasn't a concern in terms of the bigger picture around heart disease or anything like that. I go into this scan, which looks at the amount of calcium in your heart and your arteries. And it goes from a 0 to 400 in terms of the index. And 400 is high and concern. So I go in, I get the scan. The nurse walks out halfway through the scanning because I'm thinking, oh, that was pretty quick. Why is she coming back out? And she's white, like she's completely white. And she says,
400.
so do you have any symptoms? I said, nah. She goes, are you exercising? I said, yeah, I just did, 100-kilo squats 2 days ago. And she's like, sorry? And I went, well, what's the problem? And she goes, look, the score for high is 400. You scored 1,651. We're going to get you a cardiologist right now. And I'm like, okay. Where is cardiology? I'm happy. You happy? No, we're going to sit you in a wheelchair because we're worried you're going to have a heart attack on us right now. And I'm just like, what the fuck? So what I'm saying is that we don't need to have a huge number of criteria ticked off before, okay, Shano, okay, Greg, okay, I think we need to see you now. We need to be starting to screen people with a history of repetitive neurotrauma, possibly some symptoms or signs that are unusual for your age as well. And this is part of the study when I first published my first full study in 2014. A lot of the people coming in into the study were saying, oh, look, yeah, look, I've been told that, my memory's not good and I'm a bit angry and I'm not sure. I thought I was just getting old, but is 46 years of age old? And I'm like, no, you shouldn't be getting this at that age. I would expect a lot of these things happening maybe at 66 years of age, not 46. Okay, all right. And this is something that we need to address more, but it's very hard against as a pure scientist up against the clinical community, should I call it?
Also the media. Can I the first thing I'm sorry about your parents dying so young.
It's just one of those things, yeah.
Your results that would suggest that they may have had that same issue and just missed a diagnosis simply and been able to be all right. So you must be able to handle having really high.
Yeah. Look, I went and saw another cardiologist. He put me through, a whole bunch of tests, and he said, look, I can't guarantee anything, but in terms of where you should be, your best case right now, there is no evidence of any plaques breaking off and all this sort of stuff. We're still going to put you onto some medication to make sure. So I'm on statins to make sure that, things, and he said, it'll make your score worse, but it's actually making sure that everything doesn't, cause a heart attack. So, I've been on that now for probably 3-4 years, actually pre-COVID, so it might be even longer than 5 years. And so, by that early intervention, I've probably saved my life.
So this is the bit where we haven't got early intervention with
No.
CT. We're ignoring scientists like you. How can we break through this little barrier of fear, in your opinion, Alan?
Oh, again, another good question, because we've got this balance between trying to increase awareness, but not trying to create any hysteria either.
Way
And
down the other end at the moment.
that's it. Yeah, exactly. So we've got to try and bring a more, balanced conversation here, and as I call it, demystify a lot of this. But at the same time, we shouldn't be letting our former athletes, our former, soldiers suffer in
Service in New
silence.
Zealand.
Yeah, because um, because these organizations are more worried about their own branding and their image over the fact that people are suffering in silence. And so, this doesn't mean that every single athlete or every single soldier is going to have the same outcome, but there is a significant number that makes it quite concerning here, that has contributed to, particularly for sport, a lot of people have got very rich out of using athletes for entertainment.
Now, why, just on a side note, why is it that some medical things are chosen to be gospel very early on?
Yeah.
Yet some things, it takes people like you and courage and, to get anywhere. When the scientific, you are showing through analysis that brains are hurt. Yet some things we're just very quick to go, yeah, if your heart says this is the struggle with that.
Well, I mean, in saying that, I've encountered some people saying, well, that we don't accept the calcium score. So there's still, I think there's still a bit of hesitancy of scanning a lot of men and postmenopausal women to go and get a calcium density scan, because a lot of the clinical profession doesn't necessarily accept that. Now, I don't know what it takes for us to change those minds, whether it be, concussion or any other area. But yeah, it's kind of interesting that, from the concussion perspective, we're quite happy to accept a paper and pencil test called the SCAT,
Yes.
and listen to one person now who has since been discredited, who dominated the area for over 25 years, until the last 2 years, where he got found out as being a plagiarist, without due sort of scientific inquiry.
Yeah.
But particularly for sport anyway, I can't sort of talk to the military experience as much, but particularly for sport, there has been a real banding together of a lot of these sports that has made a very powerful, dare I say it, cartel, to ensure that players were getting back as quickly as possible, because that sold tickets for games. They knew that, Shane Christie's playing next week. That's going to be a draw card for us to, to sell tickets. Shane may not have been ready, but hey, he according to our criteria, he's ready to go.
That statement's clear and truthful, because it was only 7 days when they were returning from.
Yeah, that's right. And some of the research publications around that time have sort of talked about what they call an aggressive return to play strategy.
Yeah.
They actually use the word, and I've got that in published papers by these people who have dominated this area for such a long time.
Just a question back to what you've started doing, or how you started doing it. Is there a need for baseline to be able to show that there is damage or change?
Yeah, look, ideally, gold class scientific research would have baselines, but the problem is what point does a baseline start? Do we have to start testing kids at 6 or 7 years of age before they start playing contact sport? Do we have to test soldiers, 15 years of age before they maybe enter some sort of service?
Yeah.
Does that include cadets, whatever? But you know, so the next best scientific design is what we call cross-sectional. So this is where we compare you guys to age-matched controls who've never had any experience of repeated neurotrauma or concussions. And that's sort of where I lie at the moment, is kind of that cross-sectional comparison. What I've been doing in the last few years is been sort of almost comparing the age-matched controls who've never had any experience to people like yourself who say, look, you know, I've got a history of trauma, and I'm struggling, versus another group of people who say, yeah, look, I've played these sports, or I've been a soldier, but I'm okay. And my question really is, well, what's the difference? Can we see a difference? And we actually can start to see a difference. So for me, two things. One, you guys aren't bullshitting like people have accused you of, because we're seeing correlations between the scores of your reports and actual abnormalities in the testing I do. But two is the fact that, yeah, look, some people are affected and others aren't, and we need to understand, well, next step is, well, why is that? What is that difference? Is there, you know, more exposure? And it may well be. So, you know, I have a paper currently under review. Hopefully it'll get published. But what we're seeing is that it's the total exposure of sport, contact sport, rather than just the professional exposure. So it's not the level of play that you're at. Football players, rugby players, soccer players, whoever, doesn't matter what level they're playing at, they hit each other just as hard at club level as they do, say, at international level. And that's that repetitive impact on the brain is having an effect.
So that's super important that we start researching for players that have had concussion, then have issues after their career. But you were mentioning the other day around trying to identify issues with younger people now, because some CTE cases have been shown in people as young as 20, or?
Yeah. So this work's all being led by the Boston University group, who are, you know, absolutely the world leaders in this. And you know, they brought out a paper just late last year, specifically in under 30s in their brain bank. And, you know, they were showing a significant proportion of those athletes had CTE, which tells us that CTE, old person's disease. You know, in Australia, the youngest that we've shown CTE is in about 20 years of age. The youngest in America they've shown it as young as 17.
Are these from people that have committed?
Passed away. Pardon?
Would you say that suicide?
Yes. Yeah. So that's the other question is there a link between CTE and risk of suicide? So at the Brain Bank, Australian Sports Brain Bank, you know, we're sitting at about 50% of CTE cases are suicide, which is well higher than the normal population. The pushback, though, is that when you play with the numbers, a lot of the you know, dare I say it, naysayers sort of say, well, the rate of suicide is no different. And we're arguing that that's a miscalculation of the data. And what we're seeing is that suicide appears to be much higher in this group. Now, we don't know, obviously, we can't say that there's a causation between CT and suicide, but it does talk to the fact that brain disease is affecting the processing somehow, you know, and you know, the hard question is, well, if we can diagnose it in living people, what do we do? And that's all these, you know, there are so many questions going on from this, you know, that it can be quite overwhelming when you think how much work we have to do.
I think it just shows, like those points you've just made, it shows how important that resources and research are necessary
Yes.
to be sort of understood.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
not acceptable that the most beneficial contact sport games in the world are ignoring it.
Yeah, or even sort of misconstruing the idea. So, you know, I obviously you might be able to tell me a little bit more about how the New Zealand media have played, you know, say, you know, Billy's death. But here in Australia, whenever we've had, you know, an athlete death followed by a CTE diagnosis, what the sports will do is automatically default to, well, we've improved our concussion policies. No, we you know, we have better return to play concussion you know, pathways. You know, we are taking the issue of concussion very seriously. But the issue actually isn't concussion. So the public automatically think two things. One, oh, it's a concussion issue. But two, the AFL, NRL, Rugby Australia have sorted it's sorted. We don't have to worry about it anymore. And you know, this is something that what you might find in New Zealand too is that they'll start to just default back to concussion, and the public get misinformed, and this is something that we've got to try and sort out. You know, we've been able to get his wife now to come round and understand it a bit more. But you know, one of the highest profile cases of CTE in Australia was a guy called Danny Frawley, and so the AFL have a Spuds game. His nickname was Spud, and they have a Spuds game every year. They have all the players coming out before the game, arm in arm, thinking about Danny. They have on the big screens people, you know, former players, mates of his saying, you know, talk to your mates. You know, mental health. We take mental health very seriously, except the fact that Danny Frawley didn't have a mental health issue, and they completely ignore the C word, being chronic traumatic encephalopathy. His poor wife has tried to pull the conversation back to CTE, and they kind of go, oh, no, don't worry about it. Let's talk about mental health. Talk to your mates, you'll be fine. And it's not. It's, you know, we've got to get people to understand it's a brain disease.
We went to there was a concussion talk organised here in Nelson and one in Blenheim a few months back, and a lady who runs a headache clinic that's now aligned herself with concussion. We all went to it, and we asked the question around CTE, and John, Billy's dad, was there and wouldn't go near it.
No, of course not.
But yeah, almost didn't exist. You know, it's
Yes.
not true, even with Billy's dad there. And
Absolutely. I mean,
which is hard. Like people in there got no information because it didn't, you know, concussion here at the moment is talked about as a one-off. That's it. It's a one-off.
That's right. And you know, going back to the last 25 years, you know, it's been seen as a functional injury that resolves within 7 days, and there are no long-term consequences.
Yeah, I suppose we need solutions for the problem, but the solution we get now is the rule change and mouth guards that are going to prevent CT potentially. But the better solution would be maybe looking at our youth game and looking at care afterwards, because they've made massive changes for protocols for current players, but they're ignoring the before and after.
Absolutely. And you know, this is where probably the big fight is occurring at the moment, because you know, a lot of the questions around, well, how do we prevent concussions? Well, you can't prevent concussions in a physical contact sport. And that's okay. Look, that's fine. As you know, adults who can make your own informed decisions, you know what? Okay, who am I to tell you what you can and can't do? If you want to, you know, do rock climbing and risk death falling off, fine. But you know the risks of that. The problem has been is that there hasn't been a clear transparency around the risks of that. Yep. And secondly, how we really prevent CTE, because CTE is a disease of exposure, is that we need to stop full contact in children and young adolescents. So, you know, the advocacy at the moment around the world is let's have modified forms of the games until 14 years of age. It potentially can take out at least 8 years of exposure. And that the calculation brings that risk right back down if you take out about 8 years worth of repetitive exposure. And this is not even concussions. This is repetitive exposure. And
These shots, yeah.
yeah, just these little knocks, you know, that add up over time. And again, this is why the young people have been diagnosed with CTE, because they started playing football or rugby at 5 years of age.
It's a good case to say that, because it's a culture shift that we need to make for young families. But I watched an under-8, under-9s game in the weekend. They're not playing rugby. It's bull rush.
And that's what I watched the game on the weekend too.
Yeah.
It's bull rush. It's no skill. It's
There's
no.
no skill.
It's just grab people around the neck is what I saw.
Right. Okay. I was going to ask what
Technique
ball
at that
rush
age
is.
either.
Okay.
Running upright bodies like this isn't really technique. So
No.
that discussion's not quite suitable at
No.
the moment. And
And this is the point, right? So if you modify the sports, you take a lot of the incidental collisions out, but you then have an opportunity of properly teaching technique in a controlled environment in preparation for the full version of the game, say from 14 years of age. So it's not like, so I get a lot of people going, oh, well, you know, they've got to start early because they've got to get their skills up. It's like, no, they're not actually getting their skills up because they're just playing.
they're going head first into each other.
That's right.
They understand it, but it's still a lot to teach.
Yeah, that's right. And
It is hit on the right
what you
side.
can do is you can teach them the techniques at, you know, 12 and 13 in preparation. They've got 2 years of learning how to tackle, the height to tackle at, that sort of stuff, ready for the game at 14 years of age. But where was I going to go with that? With the thing is that they still get to learn all the other fundamental motor skills: running, change of direction, agility, passing, catching, teamwork, psychological resilience from winning and losing. You know, what I get really upset about is when you get people saying, don't no score. We don't want them to be upset if they win or lose.
Yeah.
Like, hang on a moment. That's what is going to build psychological resilience, not the fact that they got knocked out last week and then they can't go to school for 2 weeks. So that's kind of where we're trying to push this. But yeah, every time I suggest, you know, modifying these sports, people look at me like I've got 3 heads.
Well, that's not what you can do.
How many deaths how many deaths or how many more of you do we need before we get to this point where we say, well, we have to make a change? I mean, then we have to give that change 10 years to see, you know, like my question following on would be, now we are changing these rules and we are changing tackle height. You know, how long do we have to wait to see if this has an effect on CTE?
Well, I think, you know, we won't see any change to CTE risk until we actually modify our sports.
Yeah.
You know, like as in no contact until the age of, say, 14.
What's going to make that happen?
Yeah, look, again, I don't know, because I really
Podcast, stop.
Yep, absolutely. Because I thought here in Australia, things would change significantly following the deaths of Danny Frawley and Shane Tuck. And last year with Heather Anderson as the first female athlete in the world to be diagnosed. She was 28.
Yeah.
You know, and she epitomizes why we need to modify these sports, because she played full contact rugby and football from 5 years of age. And so, but nothing's changed. And I don't know what it's going to take. I really don't know, because I really thought that was going to be our watershed moment.
Well, I think sorry, bro. Just the key thing, that a big reason our institutions and our sporting governing systems aren't changing, because the public don't understand it properly. But then your information's being suppressed. So if a young family knew that their 7 or 8-year-old could reduce the risk of getting CTE drastically by waiting another 5 or 6 years, I think everyone would buy into that. But we can't make this decision without the right information out there.
That's right. And that's why, you know, you do have a lot of the sports having their own group of doctors and scientists that they can then push out the public relations exercise. You know, I don't know if you're aware of have a look at it, you know, the BBC story that came out in January that featured Doug King and myself where World Rugby had published a study showing that and the probably more so was the PR that went with it. And it was a study that with World Rugby, New Zealand Rugby, and Otago Rugby. And they were basically saying in the PR, so, I don't want to sort of necessarily blame the scientists themselves, but the PR that came out was very much around the fact that rugby union is causing no more, I guess, trauma to the brain or more damage to the brain than skipping or running.
Yeah, that's embarrassing, eh?
Yeah, yeah.
It's a real shame that
that's
we buy that bullshit. Like the public just buy it, but we actually sort of understand that we're being misled.
yes,
Like
yeah,
with science, we're being misled, we understand, but we just don't have the right thing to grasp onto to get truth from.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, New Zealand were very quick to say things about Billy, or people reach out to me and say about Billy, and yet nothing, like you said, that's not carried forward to action.
Yeah.
People are
And
not putting their hand up going, hey, New Zealand Rugby, but they're quick to say, oh, that's wrong, and we should support these people, and Shane needs support. And
yeah,
we're very quick to say,
yeah. Look, I get a lot of, oh, isn't it sad?
yeah,
It's just so sad. And you're like, I'm sick of hearing that.
Yeah.
And I message people back and going, I'm not sad, I'm angry.
Yeah.
I'm angry and I'm frustrated that this is the only reaction we get. Oh, it's so sad.
Can you
Well,
touch on Danny Frawley's wife's experience just to help people understand what sad is?
sorry about Danny Frawley's wife. Yeah.
Imagine what she would have had to go
Oh,
through.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And so, she's been galvanized to, to do something about it. But the problem is that the only people who get galvanized to do something about it are those who are directly affected. And what we need is a bigger groundswell. And so, I do message people back and say, I'm really pissed off, and sad doesn't cut it. If you really are truly engaged with this issue, do something about it. Raise money for research. Talk to other people about this. Don't just pretend that you're
Judge
sad.
them, mislead them. So there's the
Yeah.
thing about lack of understanding, but then there's the thing on the other side when people that are in responsible or accountable positions are putting themselves into dangerous place where they're going to make severe mistakes for those in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is what worries me is that, the next generation of junior players coming through, you know, which one of them will be affected by brain disease? Which one of those may actually take their own life at 25 or 30 years of age? Families who are going, oh, isn't it wonderful? My kid's going to be in the representative team and they're on their way to becoming an All Black. Then 5 years later, have a son or a daughter who's dead.
It's no good. So
No.
can we touch on trying to understand what Billy could have done,
Yeah.
what he could have had to have helped him or prevented him from suicide? And then if we're not researching or funding people like yourself,
Yeah.
can't develop the education that he may have needed to understand what he was going through mentally, is there any
Yeah.
advice for someone or a family that's going through something similar to this?
Yeah, that's a really tough question because, when we've spoken to, families of those who've passed away, it's like watching a slow train crash and there is nothing that they can do. And I don't know what the answer is right now because we haven't even got a formally a formal clinical diagnosis of CTE. So, it's really tough. And, I don't know if I can mention this or not. If, feel free to edit this part out. But, looking at Billy's report, where the doctor had basically said, well, I don't find grounds that a diagnosis of CTE for Billy this is what we're up against. So,
Can I touch on that piece, Al?
yeah,
Where, like you said at the start, if we research, we can provide education to family, and then if a player's retired and had
Yeah.
multiple concussions like Billy had, retired from rugby,
Yeah.
he wasn't kept up to date or monitored over the
No.
5 years, and he wasn't checked in on to make sure that his symptoms were related to concussion. So
Yeah.
we've ignored it so much that we don't even know the steps to help someone that's saying, "Oh,
Yeah.
I've got brain problems."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
That
look.
makes me wonder about the what would I call it? It's not negligent.
Mm,
Is it
Negligent.
negligence, or do you think, or is it lack of knowledge?
well, it's plausible deniability, I guess, isn't it? Because, you know, if we're ignorant about something, then we can deny the fact that we didn't know about it.
That's not true, because I know that, well, you look what the Brain Bank crew are doing in Auckland. They've spoken to New Zealand Rugby. ACC knows what's going on because they've diagnosed Tu Wiley. So that excuse is no longer available for them.
That's right. Yeah. So you know, what their I guess the cards that they play as well, you know, when Billy was still alive, we just didn't know what to do. That's the kind of excuses that they'll sort of say. Um, and you know, if we don't have a diagnosis, then how can we help them? You know, and this is where I guess, yeah, speaking to people, you know, from progressive rugby or you know, people like Alex Popham and uh, Steve Thompson, for example, you know, what is being done for them at the moment? I'm not sure. Because yeah, we just don't have any resources to be able to do that. And the best that we've got right now is from the Concussion Legacy Foundation, who have, you know, information on how to address the symptoms. But you know, that's like putting a band-aid over a festering wound. It's not actually going to address the issue underneath.
Band-Aids might slow it down though. And if we're just talking about specifically to suicide
Yeah,
or
no,
a family member helping someone suffering, that can
yeah.
relieve pain, which is going to prevent the suicide.
Well, this is, I mean, we've had a number of families sort of come out and say, look, you know, our family experience was different to someone else's family experience. Medication worked in one person's case for a little while, not for a long time, but in other cases it had no effect. We had people having ECT but had no effect, and then others said, "Oh, ECT helped for a little while," and it's, you know, while we're kind of just sort of searching the darkness, we won't get anywhere.
How do
And
we
I
look
think,
at this? You know, in my own case, we aggressively went after, through support from experts in America,
yeah,
you know, hyperbaric oxygen I used,
yeah,
been using supplements like fish oil, creatine, uh,
mm,
and I am way different to how I used to be.
yep,
Now I'm way more functional through these
yep,
holistic practices,
yep,
cold water immersion.
yep,
Uh, yeah, I just struggle sometimes when I see there is things we can be doing to help
yeah.
people
That's right. And that's the
see.
sort of stuff that we kind of you know, recommend. You know, with the nutritional space, I know that there are, you know, people in who I collaborate with in Ireland who are looking at omega-3 in particular, but are also trying to look at other, you know, what's the efficacy of say creatine or magnesium that we don't have much evidence on at the moment. A lot of it's fairly anecdotal still, which is fine, but we kind of need to really, you know, check that out. Hyperbaric chamber therapy is something that is, you know, limited at the moment because it's such a high cost. And this is where research funding is so important because, you know, if hyperbaric chamber therapy has a chance, well, that's great. But yeah, I mean, until we can actually systematically test it versus say placebo, you know, we don't want this is my other concern. We don't want people taking advantage of people like yourself who are emotionally needing help to go, yeah, we've got this therapy. It's going to cost you 50 grand. And they run away with 50 grand. And then people are left, you know, shattered at the end. So, you know, this is why it's so important because there is a lot of tech coming into the concussion space, for example, who that say, well, we can diagnose concussion without a doctor. And you think, oh, okay, for only $1,200, you can have our system. And you think, oh shit, you know, and they play on that. And this is why my concern is that we've got to, you know, we do need to be doing properly funded research so that we know exactly what can work and what can't.
Is there I thought about another thing, which is the limited research community, because it doesn't seem to be very popular. I suppose in your circumstance, you've taken a lot of heat, so a lot of researchers or doctors wouldn't want to be going into that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Are we lacking, or how can you create more
People like you.
excitement to get into this sort of area?
Look, yeah, look, it's difficult, isn't it? Because a lot of the researchers are funded by these sports directly. And so it's very difficult, I mean, you only have to look at, you know, Doug King, not him, but his colleagues, Petrea Hume, for example, who was in a really rock and a hard place trying to do independent research while being funded by New Zealand Rugby. And there's, it's in the public domain. You can read about that in the New Zealand media. But to be independent really does come at a financial cost and probably emotional cost as well, because you're trying to do the research without the amount of funding. So a lot of scientists don't want to, they need to have a salary, a regular salary, rather than just living month to month sort of thing. And yeah, so a lot of them think also that it's too risky a research area for their careers. They wanna have a long time academic career. They don't want to be pushed out or black banned from certain universities or whatever because they've got other colleagues who are working with these sports. So yeah, I don't know what the answer is other than trying to get independent funding to people like, myself, Doug King, and others who are trying to not be aligned with any of these sports for fear of being gagged.
I see. I've been thinking about how much longer contact sports can compete with things like social media, and there's a lot of technical and technology things coming out in the next 5 years. How much longer can we compete against those types of other distractions? And then if we can't, and I think the common sense thing would be that rugby is slowly going to die away. So we need to address the culture and sense that create something else from the sport. It needs to be something that uplifts the community and gives everyone more belonging instead of just creating economy out of it.
Look, I think if the sports have a really good opportunity here now to show that
100%.
their sports are, safe and have physical and health benefits, all that sort of stuff, but if they keep trying to make the sport the same way as it always was because they're wanting to, they don't like change, then that's when the sports will, these particular sports will die because
It's the only reason I think it will fade away. They won't, they're not willing to change.
That's right. Exactly. And parents will look at that and go, well, I don't want to put my kid where, they're getting in potential brain damage. Let's put it, go.
It was interesting the other day that with this, Shane was saying at the start about rugby looking at a split if things don't go either way. The head of the Players Association said, we want to take it our way if you don't join us, because, and he listed these things, and one of them was player safety. This is the same guy who talked to a group of elite rugby players saying, I'll put some bullet points up on the website around the treatment plan. I'm like, if you're putting up a couple of bullet points having to be asked, you're up here saying, we're going to move away and be our own entity because player safety is one of our criteria. Like, I'm not sure how that fits. People are not going to follow that. People are going to go, well, you're saying that, but
and that's it does get a bit tiresome when you get the athlete health and well-being as our greatest priority. I mean, it's just people are not even believing that anymore.
Players see straight through it. The players that I've spoken to understand that they are putting themselves at risk. They know the contact that they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they want to be able to be looked after if something tragic happens to them.
Well, of course, absolutely. But you won't get the next generation or future generations of players coming along unless they do actually demonstrate that they are making these at junior level, the sport's safer. Once the kids start to learn, this is a great sport, you'll have them for life. But if they get scared early because, some kid who weighs 30 kilos more has just run through them and given them, made them sick for the next week from a concussion, they won't want to go back and play. Whereas, you watch kids in the playground, anywhere, who make up their own games. They don't go and automatically try and just wipe each other out. They're playing games that are enjoyable, and they want to keep playing. And so we've got to try and harness that element of enjoyment, rather than just pure physicality, because that's what the parents, or not the parents, but the officials want to see. Oh yeah, this is how
The
I play.
spectators,
Pardon?
the spectators love that, but that's a good case for extending the age grade contact a little bit later, because you could change weight,
Yep.
introduce them into contact at
Yeah.
certain sizes and weights.
That's right. Exactly. And so, the traditionalists are the ones that are holding things back right now, because they want to do things the way they were. But, you talk to a lot of people who drop out of sport, and there are a lot of the reasons why they drop out of these sports is because of the concern around their injuries and their brain health.
Forced out of it early.
Yeah, very much.
In Australia, with everything you're seeing now come out with players and CTE or this concussion, your version of WorkSafe, are they involved yet, or is that not?
Well, no. So interestingly, there's a loophole in the workplace laws.
No.
Yeah. And particularly in the AFL, Australian football, professional AFL players are not eligible for work cover. So the CEO of the AFL falls down the stairs, he's eligible for work cover, but the players themselves are not eligible for work cover. And that was because of a law here, a law here in Victoria from 1972, when a football player got a spinal injury. And so the concern was that he couldn't work anymore. So what they did was they tweaked the work cover laws, workers' compensation law, that professional athletes would not be eligible or entitled to workers' compensation. And so this is why there's a class action going on, because the players have basically been forced out of their sport without any proper payout. The AFL have offered them a certain amount, which is not going to help them for the next 50 years of their life. And so that's why there's class actions going on.
Which is a shame. It just makes the sport look worse to the public. Absolutely.
Do you think if some of these class actions, like World Rugby, like the one you just talked about, if they go to trial and there is an outcome of support to players, do you think that's going to cause radical change? Will it have to?
Yeah, look, I don't know, because if you look at the American experience, the NFL lost their claim against the players for what, $1.1 billion. But it seems to be much less in the media, but the National Hockey League, NHL, won their claim against the players, or the court case. So the players lost against the National Hockey League. And this is I think one of the reasons why the CEO from ice hockey still denies that there's a link between concussions or repetitive neurotrauma and CTE, because his sport won it.
Because they won.
Because, I don't know what to say about that. How do you think that they won, as from a scientific or?
Well, yeah, I think they won because they had people from the consensus group, in particular the one particular person who is no longer involved because of plagiarism and misconduct and that sort of stuff. But he could clearly argue that there was no evidence of causal link between repetitive neurotrauma and CTE.
Can you explain that, Doc? I don't fully understand that.
Yeah, so he was able to convince the court, and the burden of evidence is not the same in law as it is in science. So in science, we need to have a 95% probability that something is real. For the law, it's about 51%. So the burden of evidence is not as strong, and he was able to clearly convince, and this is,
Well,
back in,
hard to do that. Yeah, I can see
yeah,
how that, yeah.
that's right. So, I was a co-author on a paper published 2 years ago where we argued that there was a causal link using the same criteria as what they did to show that there was links between smoking and cancer. It's called the Bradford-Hill criteria. And we clearly showed across the 9 domains that there's evidence for this. But, the most recent consensus statement published last year still says that there is no causal links between repetitive neurotrauma and CTE. So Billy's case, don't know. We know why, but that's how they can say, well, we don't really know why he got CTE.
Yeah.
Which is disgraceful.
Well, that's because now they can prove that the difference between drug use and contact is completely different with the type of damage that you can.
The pathology. Yep, the pathology is different. I'm not a pathologist, but pathologists who I've spoken to, have published data to definitely show there is a difference in, pathology between alcohol abuse, chronic drug use, and chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And I think that data is actually up on the Concussion Legacy Foundation website. They talk to the pathologist in particular, Gabor Kovacs, who shows that there is difference.
How do they, when CT was first discovered, in that amazing movie that talks about it, was clearly linked to that, it was these sports people that led. How can we say it's anything other than that? Now we know that the pathology is different, but how can people stand on their legs and say,
Yeah, well, it's interesting because some of these people have published, papers that have shown that there is CTE in people who've not had, or not in sports athletes, for example. But when people have deconstructed these papers, they've shown that some of these people have had long-term epilepsy. So the brain has been basically, and a lot of impact from the seizures as well.
Yes.
Some had been not disclosed that they were boxers. So, this is the thing. We don't see CTE in anyone who doesn't have repetitive neurotrauma.
Yeah.
So that's the key. And even if we took the benefit of the doubt that that there could be CTE in those, the percentage of that is so small, compared to athlete cohorts where the percentage is so high. You can't, it's so hard to try and deny that this is actually, but World Rugby have some people who still deny that CTE is a real disease.
Well, there's faults in our systems, because if the law can refute science by getting 51% what probability or likeliness, then you're pretty up against it.
Yeah.
I think it would be really interesting for, oh, sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, it would be really good to get a legal person on your podcast to talk about that and to try and get people to understand that difference between obviously what, burden of proof for science versus, burden of proof for the law.
Yeah. My partner's a former police forensics expert.
Mm-hmm.
And she constantly talks about the challenge of presenting evidence in a forensics way to a jury of, I don't say it disrespectfully, but uneducated. You can't understand scientific process of gathering data, in a crime scene.
That's right.
It's hard to present the facts.
That's right, and that's
51%. Somebody go, I don't know if that. Oh, yeah,
and that's all it is. Yeah, it's who can provide the better argument, not necessarily the more scientific facts.
Can I have a quick question? all the people that you've assessed using your methods, identifying people with brain injury, trauma, the different things you've seen.
Yeah.
What have they gone away with as in a treatment or a process to be different or better or not?
Well, look, for me,
general advice.
Yeah, look, as a scientist, I very clearly disclose that I can't give clinical advice, but certainly from my research, I give them some suggestions and recommendations, which is based around, unfortunately, the best we've got is from the Alzheimer's space on good social contacts, nutrition, reduction of alcohol and physical exercise. And, I feel terrible in only being able to offer that, and possibly, do something challenging for your brain, like learning a musical instrument or learning a language, but that's no guarantee about CTE or even dementia, like all we can do is try and provide some general advice. But for some, for most of them, probably if not all of them, they go away at least feeling like they've got some more information that they never had before. So most of the time they just get dismissed and going, there's nothing wrong with you. Go, don't worry about it. You'll be fine. Whereas at least I can give them some information that says, yeah, look, we're seeing some changes, or no, we're not seeing changes. So that for them, at least it's some data for them to go, oh, okay, at least I know where I'm at now. And that's what, I've always been about is data as a scientist.
Yeah. Do you ever direct people to go and look at Sally's work or go and look at John's work?
Yeah, look as well. Yeah,
in a different aspects.
Yeah, try and get them to do some further investigations and get some other advice from people as well. But also sort of remind them that it could be more confusing as well. So if you have any questions, I'm more, I sort of offer to say, look, I can help translate some of this stuff if you need to. Yeah, because it can be quite an overwhelming space to be in.
Yeah. How do we use you? That's a big one part of the pillars that we're looking at is that translation, and it's something I've seen in my space in the military, translating my service in the special operations to people that are trying to help me. It's been incredibly hard, and there's only one or two professionals in New Zealand that I've met that can help me in that translation space. It's something we really struggle with, something Billy's family struggled with.
It might be worthwhile, and I'm only thinking as I speak here, but in a friendly environment, it might be worthwhile pulling together a seminar day, with a couple of those professionals, and I'm happy to try and get across as well, and we have a day to speak to families and those directly as well, in an environment that may also provide some support as well. So it might be a little bit of here's where the science is at, but then a lot of it is just being able to let you guys all talk to each other, and then we can be there to say, if someone says, look, I've been told that such and such therapy is worthwhile, is it worthwhile telling? And then the people like ourselves can say, well, we haven't seen any evidence yet, or yes, there's good evidence for that. So that might be something that can at least you can provide as something tangible for these people right now. And then coming together, it might allow you then also to create a group or association or something that then you can work as a collective unit to raise awareness, rather than just two people on your own here right now soldiering on, feeling quite isolated.
Yeah, I'm lucky in military space. We're creating a group like that now. One of the leaders in our veterans, non-governmental veterans area is creating that. You've just said, so we'll also try and mirror that to but a big one for me, and you nailed it, and it's one thing we've especially seen with Billy's family, is not having that tick list we talked about earlier of the behaviours that can happen. I feel if we had a really good list that people could go to just to identify, okay, Shane is getting a lot more angry, or Gregg seems to be forgetting more. People don't know they just get to label it whatever they want.
Yep,
And that had
exactly.
a massive effect on Billy's family.
And Billy's decision to take his
Yeah,
life. That was
by
the
creating a truth that wasn't true.
Yeah, that's
You
it.
know, and then sometimes that truth certainly doesn't lead to the support that people need, because
Exactly.
we've just headed off in this tangent without knowledge. That's one
right.
thing we really need, is this list of key behaviors, so people can identify
Yeah.
if that baseline has changed in just interpersonal stuff.
Yeah.
Then we
Yeah,
can
exactly.
start looking, and then reaching out to people like you for that translation.
Yep.
Going to the professionals that they need to get a diagnosis to start.
Mm.
Yeah.
Or some information at the very least.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good start.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. So your personal introduction into researching concussion was cool. 9 years of research and you to develop something or stumbled across something that's been incredibly helpful. But I'm really interested, and maybe we could finish on this talk around how you've been able to persist
Mm.
in your journey, because I think that
Yeah.
it says a lot about your character, and that's something I really respect. And I think the people, that players and hopefully other staff in New Zealand Rugby, will see that and maybe get a little bit of courage from yourself, because it means a lot to
Yeah.
me and Greg and professional players that see someone like you and
Yeah.
finding a way for them, and they don't really get the recognition that you deserve. So what keeps you going, mate?
It's you guys. As simple as that. You know, over the years, it's just been having players, you know, and their families, but their players in particular coming in and, you know, sort of really needing to get some information has been what has kept me going, because to be able to be helpful and useful is what we're all about as human beings, really, isn't it? I mean, it's not necessarily about the money. It's not about being, you know, rich and famous. I mean, I couldn't care less about the media. You know, I'll do it because no one else is doing it right now, but it's not something that kind of drives me. What drives me is, you know, talking to you guys, and not just at elite level, but at club levels too, you know, and having people coming in and sort of saying, you know, I played club footy for 25 years and, you know, no one seems to care that, you know, I'm struggling at the moment. They said that I could be, you know, looked after, but they're not caring. No one wants to listen to me. And just being there is enough to keep me going, because then I know that I'm contributing and helping in some small way for you guys as well. And that's what it's about. And even just letting, you know, some players just being able to be themselves is kind of what, you know, makes me feel useful.
Yeah.
You know, I'm grateful to you and what you're doing, and the the resilience you've shown, because biggest part of my journey's just been not heard. You know,
Yeah,
feeling of not
exactly.
being heard is a really hard, every day is a battle trying to explain what's going on for you. So I'm so
Exactly.
grateful for what you're doing.
No, appreciate it. No, more hoping to keep pushing, that's for sure.
Yeah, us too.
Maybe just the start, and I hope that you get the recognition when it eventually
When it comes.
changes, because it's going to.
Yeah.
Like we've
Yeah,
discussed,
yeah.
things are moving forward in a good way. It's just people need to be brave, like yourself.
Yeah, well, I don't know about being brave, but certainly, yeah.
Brave, mate.
We see it.
10 years
Yeah.
of getting
Yeah.
bagged out in the media's.
Yeah.
You
We
gotta
both
have
know
a
what
tough-
brave looks like. So
Yeah,
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
appreciate it.
thank you. That's anything you want to finish off, or anything you don't think that we've.
Oh, look, you know, no, just, you know, I think people just need to just push the issue and not just think, oh, someone else is going to look after it. You know, take some personal investment and engagement in the issue. You know, there are really good organizations out there like the Concussion Legacy Foundation, you know, the Brain Bank, the Australian Sports Brain Bank are also very good in support as well. So I know that the New Zealand Brain Bank will probably, you know, grow at some point, but in the meantime, you know, don't hesitate to reach out to those two at least. You know, and I'm on, you know, social media as well with Instagram and X, or formerly Twitter, but you know, happy to also help out where I can as well.
Yeah, thank you, Doc. I think it's such a cool area for young people. Like
Mm.
something interesting in this, that if I was a young person and I had enough smarts to go to university and get into neuroscience and
Mm.
pathology and things like that, what an interesting area.
It's certainly the final frontier, like in terms of, you know, we know so much about other parts of the human body, but we know very little about the brain.
Yeah.
Still.
You know, we know even less about the injured brain.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
Oh, well,
All
thank you
righty.
for your time, Alan. Really appreciate it, mate.
Not a problem. No, well, hopefully, yeah, we'll get some more people onto your podcast as well.
Yeah, thanks. Hopefully we can talk to Doug.
Yeah, yeah, he'll certainly be one person that you need to talk to.
He's had a wild time as well.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it, mate.
Thank you.
All right. No worries. Thanks
Yeah,
very
keep in
much.
touch.
Have an
Will
amazing
do.
Thank
Okay.
you.